Today I shall be talking about how to start reading books. You see, if you're someone who hates reading and views books as something boring and you know um, a waste of your time, then perhaps I could change your mind. I have met people who have told me that they think that reading is utterly boring. Perhaps it could be because they find books as a big lump or wall of text of words, of letters. What they don't know is that when they start reading or when they start comprehending these words, they eventually dive into a completely different world. They see images in their minds as though it were a movie or a film, but they themselves are imagining it with the power of their brain. If you are someone who really wants to read but don't know where to start or don't know how to actually maintain the habit of reading, do you want to start reading because you want to widen your arsenal of vocabulary, or is it because you want to pose as an intellectual and you want to flex on your friends? Or perhaps you could just want to read for the purpose of entertainment or enjoyment. So you must definitely find your purpose. Well, personally, I started reading simply because it was there. Ever since I had been little, or when I had been in my preteens, I was, I had been so totally amazed by this animation, this YouTube animation of Six of Crows. And I was like, to my parents, I had said, "Oh, mommy, daddy, I would like, I would like for you to buy this fiction book because this animation is just simply amazing." But even then, before that, I had also been reading for quite some time. My parents had a couple of books of children's books that I had read. So basically, I had been reading simply because it has always been there. But if someone is most unfortunate for you, you did not grow in the same environment, then you must find your purpose. Once you have found your purpose, you will definitely use it as a motivation to keep pushing forward on the habit of reading. Like when I had discovered that animation of Six of Crows, and that definitely introduced me to the world of fantasy fictions. Perhaps you could find the TV shows or movies that you love, your favorites, and try to scour for information for the books, the original books of those TV shows or those movies, because it's most likely that those movies or TV shows you have watched are actually adaptations of a book, and it's not redundant at all if you read the books of those movies, of those live actions, because it's most likely that those adaptations are completely different from the book. Basing it on my own experience, so most directors for live action adaptations like to tweak some bits of the books that they're basing it off of. So don't worry, it is not redundant. You are not reading the same thing because it could be totally different. If you're someone who has not found their interest quite yet, like you do not know if you want to read for information, or you just have a general purpose. However, you do not know what specific book you would like to read, then I would most definitely recommend fiction. Because if you read fiction, it would interest you to keep moving forward and maintain this habit of reading. Because if you read something as complex as Darwin or whatever those informative books, then you would get discouraged from continuing on reading. So, for example, if you loved Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, then you should definitely read fantasy. Or if you like action, then you should read action. So, find what genres do you usually watch. If you like romance, then read romance. I think romance is the most accessible form of genre. books. So going to the most accessible media or mediums of books. You could read anywhere, anything. Um, it could be Wattpad, it could be Archive of Our Own, fanfiction.net, it could be essays, it could be poetry, it could be, or just novels, It does not have to be something like this. It does not have to be a physical copy. You could read on your phone, you could read on your laptop, anywhere in the internet. You could just read articles if that is what you want. I most particularly would discourage you from reading Wattpad, because Wattpad is full of 14-year-olds who are bad at writing, and it would not help you with your articulation or your vocabulary at all, or even your comprehension. It will not make you a literate person. So I would only recommend Archive of Our Own, or novels, or essays, or articles. Another thing you can do is go to a bookstore and scour the aisles for books. You could pick up a book from the bookstore and start reading the first page, not the prologue, not the introduction, not the preface. You could just read the first chapter and see if it captivates you, if it is interesting. If it is interesting, pick that book up, purchase it, and read it at home, on your way home, right? I know that complex language can be daunting. Like, for example, that word I just used, daunting. It is not something that is used in normal everyday life. So that you can build up this proficiency and reach the level of the proficiency that a reader may have with their vocabulary, then you should definitely start with something simple. Do not start with the language so complex you cannot grasp it or understand it for the life of you. You must start with something simple, something you can grasp. Like, for example, authors such as Brandon Sanderson, or Marcus Zusak, who else? Susan Dennard, Lee Bardugo. Oh, I'm giving you recommendations in fantasy. Or Harry Potter. You could start with Harry Potter. I have this whole series up here. Those are the books that I would generally consider to be really simple. So if you have found a book that is simple for you, then reading through it all would be a breeze, and it would be a kind of reward once you have finished it, and that reward will push you to read even more books. Okay, so do not think reading as sessions. You must think of reading as something flexible, anything, a hobby or an action you can do anytime and anywhere. Because if you think reading as something that you must lock yourself in a room in order to read for hours on end, then it's just simply overwhelming, You must think of reading as something that you can do anywhere, right? So you can read before bed, you can read while you're eating breakfast, you can read while you're on the commute, or you're walking, or you're at school, or, at a cafe or at a restaurant. So don't think of reading as a session, because it would simply overwhelm you. You do not need to read for 5 hours a day. You just need to read at least 5 pages to consider yourself as an adept reader. So the last tip I would give you is to change your mindset. This is speaking from experience. When I was in junior high school, maybe grade 7 to grade 10, I had taught myself as someone stupid in the field of mathematics. When I had taught myself as stupid, I definitely did not grasp the lessons. I failed at mathematics. But when I had graduated or had moved up to senior high school, now in grade 11, I changed my mindset and said, why, mathematics is not difficult at all. It is something that you can learn. Not even someone as stupid as I can learn mathematics. So when I had done that, I definitely at least became average in mathematics. I stopped beating myself up for getting a problem wrong. I studied and studied, doing practice problems, studying effectively, and not, putting off the homeworks or the studying for a quiz or an exam. So the question is, how must you apply this for reading? When you think yourself as someone who is stupid, has no focus at all, then it will be as it is. You shall be someone who is stupid and thus cannot grasp text at all. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you must change your mindset, think of yourself, or change your identity to someone who is an intellectual, someone who is a reader. Think, even though you have not read anything at all, still think of yourself as a reader. Okay, so because if you think of yourself as a reader, your ego will definitely change itself in order to adhere to your wishes, right? So if you have thought of yourself as someone who likes to read, then you will definitely love reading. Once you have become acquainted with the habit of reading, or have become comfortable with reading, then you can deviate from fiction. You can deviate from that genre, like what I have done before. My first books were children's books. My second books of genres were fantasy fictions. My third genre, I definitely became bored with fantasy. Then I switched to sci-fi. I became interested in classics. Then I read philosophy. I read psychology, self-help books. Then once you just need to get acquainted with the habit of reading a certain genre, then you can eventually become interested in other genres as well. You do not need to read fiction for your whole life. You can just start with fiction and then get acquainted with the habit of reading, and then deviate from that genre and go to other genres as well. So do not start with philosophy. I'm not saying you should start with philosophy. I'm saying you should start with something simple. If you have no background in reading at all, then you should start with something as simple as fiction, or YA, or young adult fiction. You can also start with just don't start with Tolkien, because definitely the archaic language would be too difficult for you or overwhelming. Do not start with philosophy. Do not start with psychology or classic literature, because classic literature is most definitely very boring. If you think that books are boring, then classic literature is also boring. But with the exception of George Orwell. Oh, and Fahrenheit 451. But those are complex books that you may not be able to grasp. Now, that is all. Thank you for listening. This is definitely my first video. I'd like to publish this to YouTube, and I want to test out my editing skills. That is all. I hope that this video helps you. Thank you for listening.